Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I walked into the demo room with the kind of quiet tension that always came with government briefings. Everyone's on edge, waiting for something. The place was packed. Brass, state officials, clean-cut contractors with clean, eager faces. But I was here for one thing, to watch my brother Nolan sell his latest project. The moment he saw me, that smug half-smile slipped into place, the one I hated. I could see his mind working, already lining up his pitch. He grabbed the mic, his voice smooth as ever. "Just observe. No comments." I nodded and took a seat near the back, leaning in but keeping my mouth shut. This wasn't the time for family drama. I had a job to do. The slides started. First, the seismic wave dispersion, then the zero collapse assurance bullet points. Everything was polished, right down to the graphs, but the numbers didn't sit right. One formula kept gnawing at me, the way a puzzle piece looks almost perfect, but not quite. "Unbreachable load-bearing design," Nolan said, his eyes scanning the room like he knew everyone was hooked. That term, unbreachable, hung in the air like a dare. No one called it out, not yet. The next slide showed a stress distribution chart. Something was off with it. The symbol used looked like something from the riddle books we used to joke about as kids. It didn't belong in a real structural formula. My gut tightened. I kept my mouth shut. There was no point drawing attention to it. Not yet. But the longer I stared, the more I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a clue, a piece of something bigger, buried beneath all the glossy salesmanship. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to be right. And something told me Nolan's game-changing tech wasn't the breakthrough he thought it was. I sat in the back of that demo room, but my mind wasn't fully there. It kept drifting back to Sunday mornings. To the table at home, cluttered with newspapers, coffee cups, and the smell of my mom's cinnamon rolls. Puzzles. That's how our weekend started. It was always crosswords and cryptograms. Me, Nolan, and Mom. Mom would say, "Look with both eyes and your heart." She always said that. It was her way of telling us to slow down, to see the bigger picture, not just the individual pieces. Nolan hated that phrase, thought it was soft. He couldn't stand the idea of waiting for something to click. He had to perform. He'd rush through, trying to outpace the puzzle, trying to beat us to the solution. If he solved one too quickly, he'd gloat. If he struggled, he'd blame it on the puzzle being stupid or too hard. I'd just keep going, looking for the connections, for the one thing that made the whole thing fall into place. I got better at it. I'd wait for the pattern. And slowly, I started beating him. That's when he pulled away. He started calling the puzzles childish, said I only won because I was lucky or sneaky. He'd push the paper away, like he had more important things to do. It wasn't just puzzles we butted heads over. Our whole childhood was like that. He'd perform. Everything was about the next win, the next photo for the family album. I'd study, focused on the details that others missed. Nolan got the accolades. I got the satisfaction of knowing how things worked. I hated those Sunday mornings after he gave up. The silence would stretch between us like a chasm. Mom would keep pushing the puzzles on us, trying to bridge the gap. But even she knew it wasn't the same. Nolan was already thinking about the next thing, always thinking ahead, while I stayed behind, looking for the pieces that didn't fit. I tried to remember that in the demo room. I tried to stay calm, like I always did when I was solving something, when I had time to really see it. But Nolan's voice kept cutting through my thoughts, that little smirk of his, the way he'd dominate a conversation without really saying anything important. I wasn't going to let that happen here, not this time. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the demo room buzzing faintly in the background, and thought about how far Nolan and I had drifted. It wasn't just the puzzles we stopped sharing. That separation started years ago, when we picked our paths. I went into the Army Reserve, focused on civil structures, flood barriers, and quake zones. Real work, stuff that needed grit. I spent my days digging ditches, reinforcing levees, and building what needed building. The kind of work that didn't make headlines but kept people alive. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't care about awards or recognition. Nolan, he went civilian, civil engineering. Big firm jobs, PowerPoints, conferences. He climbed fast like I always knew he would, posting photos of awards and fancy groundbreakings. It was all polished, all about the next big deal. He liked the spotlight. I didn't. Our calls got short, texts here and there, updates on what we were doing, like it was all just data now. When I earned a medal after leading an emergency rebuild in a hurricane zone, I figured maybe that would get through to him. Maybe he'd call, say something that felt like we were family again. Instead, I got a text. Even reserves give out ribbons now? That was it. After that, holiday invites stopped coming. Christmas dinners, New Year's. The family thread on our phones got sanitized. No more pictures of my nephews or my mom's cooking. No updates, no jokes, just those distant happy holidays messages. The kind that had no warmth to them, no meaning. And I guess that's when I knew. Nolan wasn't just someone I'd grown apart from, he was someone who'd outgrown me, who thought he'd left me behind. Maybe that's why it stung so much to see him in that demo room, so polished and sure of himself. His words flowed like butter, selling his project like it was going to change the world. It's hard to look at someone you once shared everything with and realize they're not the person you thought they were anymore. That's what Nolan was now. A brand, a performance. And me? I was just a guy who knew how to keep things standing when everything else crumbled. But even with all that distance, even after everything, I couldn't ignore what was wrong in that room. Something in the numbers, the design, the whole pitch wasn't right. I wasn't about to let it slide. Not now. Not when it had the potential to hurt people. A few days later, I got a message from National Infrastructure. You're on the review panel for the upcoming demo. No questions. Just observe. I didn't need to be told twice. I knew exactly what that meant. Someone suspected something, but they didn't want to stir the pot. They needed a second pair of eyes, but they needed those eyes quiet. No one wanted to start a fire. I showed up to the room. It was packed again, but this time, it was different. The stakes were higher. A lot of people were here because they needed this project to go well, and they needed it to go well badly. When I walked in, I spotted Nolan immediately. He was up front, his slick suit making him look even more like the salesman he'd turned into. He was already pitching it, smooth, confident. Like this retrofit kit of his was the second coming of Archimedes. It looked perfect. Too perfect. I slipped into a seat toward the back, doing my best to keep a low profile. He flipped through the slides, his voice cutting through the room like he was selling a miracle. Everything sounded so rehearsed, too polished. The slides showed seismic wave dispersion, how the system guaranteed zero collapse assurance. Buzzwords, all of it. But the math? The math didn't add up. Then I saw it. The stress distribution chart. The one with that strange symbol. It was old, something we used to joke about as kids. A riddle glyph. Something that had no place in a real structural formula. A joke. But it wasn't funny anymore. Nolan didn't miss a beat. He was too busy laying it on thick. No structure will fall with this in place, he finished, leaning back with that smug look on his face. Applause rose from the crowd, the kind of fake enthusiasm people put on when they don't want to be the first to question the golden boy. But my stomach dropped. I knew it. I knew it wasn't right. It wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. The applause kept going, but I wasn't paying attention to any of that. I was thinking about the math, the symbol, the ignored warnings. This wasn't about looking smart. This wasn't about outshining Nolan or proving anything. I wasn't here to be clever. I was here to be right. And something deep in my gut told me this wasn't just some minor mistake. It was a ticking time bomb dressed up in fancy slides and corporate jargon. I wasn't going to let it slide, no matter what. I got back to my place, shut the door behind me, and immediately started pulling the data they'd handed me. Structural specs, simulation logs, budget memos. My desk was cluttered with printouts and files, but I didn't care. This had to be done right. It had to be thorough. I opened the core module first, the part where the actual reinforcement design lived. I was looking for flaws. I needed to find something solid that I could sink my teeth into. And I found it, right there in black and white. The module was based on an old retrofitting polymer mix that had been rejected 2 years ago by federal oversight. The reason? Sheer failure. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some minor oversight. They knew about the failure risk. They'd just buried it. I kept digging, following the trail, buried deep in an email chain from the design team. Skipping wind tunnel stress to save time. We'll mark it around it. That sentence froze me. Skipping wind tunnel stress? That test wasn't optional. It was required for federal adoption of any new bridge reinforcement design. You couldn't just bypass it and call it a shortcut. That was a violation, a major one. I didn't need to read any more to know where this was headed. This wasn't just bad math. It wasn't just a flawed design. This was negligence. They were cutting corners and pretending it didn't matter. But it did. If deployed, those reinforcements would snap under lateral force in a quake. I moved quickly, pulled out my old notes, cross-checked everything against the data. There were timestamps, signatures on audits, all showing the same thing. The stress tests hadn't been done, the failure risks weren't acknowledged, and the core materials were garbage. I started compiling it all into a report. Diagrams, email excerpts, simulation logs, evidence. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't here to be a whistleblower, but I wasn't going to let a disaster happen just because people were too eager to make a deal. I could hear Nolan's voice in my head. No structure will fall with this in place. That's the problem with people like him. They sell you a shiny story, and you forget to look under the surface. But I wasn't going to let it slide. This wasn't about saving face. It was about saving lives. I prepared my file. It was airtight. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else saw it too. Someone higher up who couldn't ignore the warning signs. I wasn't going to let that day come and go without doing something, not this time. The room was sterile, closed off from the outside. No press, no cameras, just the panel, a handful of government officials, engineers, and Nolan, sitting beside his firm's legal rep. I stood at the front, files in hand. The air was thick with anticipation, like a storm waiting to break. I didn't have to say much. I let the documents speak for themselves. I laid out everything I'd found. The skip tests, the altered logs, the audit failures that had been swept under the rug. I showed them the diagrams, the timestamps, the sign-offs that made it clear this wasn't a mistake. This was negligence. Nolan stayed quiet at first, watching from his side of the table with that practiced, confident air. But it didn't take long before he started deflecting. "I'm sure you've all heard about my brother's bias," he said, a thin smile stretching across his face. His bitterness over some personal issues. That's all this is. He's been waiting for something like this, and now he's just trying to cause trouble. I let it hang there for a second. The room shifted, the panel looking back and forth between us, unsure of where to focus. The legal rep nodded slightly, trying to back Nolan up without saying much. But the panel wasn't buying it. One of the members, an older woman, leaned forward, her face unreadable. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "are you absolutely certain of your findings?" I didn't hesitate. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be here. I laid out the final piece, the wind tunnel test that had been skipped. No shortcuts in engineering, not when lives were at stake. I could see the shift in the room as the words landed. It wasn't about family drama anymore. It was about the numbers, the facts, the consequences. The panel exchanged a few quick looks. No more arguing. They knew what had to happen. "Deployment is suspended," the woman said, her voice firm. "Funding is paused. We'll be initiating an investigation into the oversight and approval process." The finality of it hit like a punch to the gut. Nolan slumped in his chair, his back straight but his shoulders giving way. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. I wanted to feel something. Relief, vindication, even anger, but I didn't. The truth settled on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I had done what I had to do. Duty had won out over everything else, but there was no victory in that. No applause, just a quiet, lingering sense that this was what needed to happen. Nolan didn't speak, didn't even glance in my direction. His face stayed frozen, that tight mask he'd perfected over the years. I didn't feel any triumph, just the burden of having done the right thing, even if it cost me more than I cared to admit. The panel adjourned without a word, and the room emptied out. I walked out, alone in a crowd of people who'd never understand what had just happened. The whispers started the moment the news hit the office. Some people called me brave, said I'd done what needed to be done. Others, well, they called me a traitor, a snake. One of the contractors at the base even posted an anonymous message in one of the internal forums, claiming I'd stabbed blood in the back. That one stung. I hadn't done it to hurt Nolan, but I knew exactly what they meant. They couldn't see the bigger picture. They didn't get it. But the real heat didn't come from the contractors or the forums. It came from the people who still had skin in the game, those with more power, more sway. They weren't angry, not openly. They were too polished for that. But the air was thick with tension. I could feel it in the way they avoided eye contact, the way they spoke just a little quieter when they passed me in the halls. Command? They didn't make a spectacle out of it. They didn't wave a flag. They supported me, quietly. When the critics got too loud, they reassigned them, reined them in. No ceremony, just discipline. I was getting the cold shoulder from the higher-ups, but it was more than I'd expected. No one was going to mess with the project now. No one was going to let it slide under the rug. But one of the junior officers came up to me one afternoon while I was going over blueprints. He was new, just a kid really, barely out of training. "Would you do it again?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't hesitate. "I didn't choose between family and duty," I said. "I chose the side that keeps bridges from falling." He nodded. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the same way mine had when I was his age. The difference was, he had the chance to learn the right lessons now. Later, I got an email from Ethan. Just a line, "Maybe you saved more than pride." I didn't reply. I archived it. That's what I did with anything that didn't matter anymore. It was a reminder of what had come before, and I had no intention of revisiting it. So I kept working. I wasn't here for approval. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to teach the others how to catch the smallest detail, how to check every bolt, every line, every test gate, how to make sure that when things break, it's not on you. I walked through the halls of the department, my head down, focusing on the job at hand. No applause, no thanks, no acknowledgement, but it didn't matter. I wasn't looking for any of it. All I wanted was to keep people safe, and that, for now, was enough. A year later, I found myself standing at the front of a conference room, talking to a room full of engineers and officials. My session was on failure points in civil defense retrofits. I wasn't here to talk about theory or what-ifs. I was here to talk about the kind of failures that could cost lives, the ones that sneak through unnoticed until it's too late. As I spoke, I scanned the room. Most faces were familiar, or at least predictable. Engineers nodding, scribbling notes, looking for something they could use. But then, somewhere near the back, I saw him. Nolan. No firm logo, no title on the name tag. Just his name, scribbled in a familiar scrawl. He sat quietly, listening, not trying to steal the spotlight, not even making a sound. He didn't raise his hand to challenge me or try to show off how much he knew. He just listened. For the first time in a long time, I couldn't read his face. There was no smugness, no arrogance, just focus, like he was actually taking something in. After the session, I packed up my things, ready to leave when I saw him standing at the side, waiting. He didn't approach right away. He just stood there, almost as if he were giving me the space to decide if I wanted to speak. When he finally did walk up, there was no fanfare. No apology for the past year, for the fallout. No words about what had happened between us. He simply handed me a folder. No pleasantries, just a quiet, direct handoff. "New design," he said. "Needs eyes that won't lie to it." I took the folder from him, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The old tension, the one I'd pushed down, buried in favor of the work, suddenly resurfaced. I flipped it open, taking a glance at the first few pages. It looked solid. Better. "I'll review it," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Pick it up in 2 days. No promises." He nodded. No thanks, no acknowledgement of anything else, just a simple nod. Then he turned and walked away. No show of emotion. No trying to salvage anything between us. Just business. And in that moment, I respected him more than I ever had when he was the golden boy in the shiny suit. I respected him because for once, he didn't try to sell me on anything. He just asked for what he needed, and then left it to me to do my job. There was no grand gesture, no apology or reconciliation. But what just happened between us, that was enough. I opened the folder when I got back to my office, flipping through the pages. Right away, I could tell this wasn't the same design Nolan had tried to pass off before. It was a real emergency bridge relay system, something that could actually work. The materials were rated properly, everything mapped out with precision. The stress points? They were mapped, with no shortcuts. The test gates were all present, including the one he'd once skipped, the wind tunnel stress test that had been so conveniently ignored. And tucked between the margins of the diagrams, I spotted it. Pencil marks, faint, almost imperceptible. The kind of thing you do when you're working through a problem, erasing a mistake, trying to figure out where failure might have once been hidden. There was rigor here now, the kind I hadn't seen from him in years, the kind I respected. I didn't feel a rush of satisfaction. It wasn't like the first time I'd found something wrong. There was no joy in discovering this was a real design, one that had finally been taken seriously. No, this time, it felt different. More subdued. There was humility in what he'd done, something he hadn't shown me before. I made my notes, a few minor suggestions here and there, adjustments to the materials list, some recalculations on stress resistance. Nothing that would throw the whole thing off, nothing that would stop it. When I was done, I sent him an email. One word, good. Within a minute, his reply came, proceeding as marked. That was it. No more words, no more back and forth, no reunion, no I was wrong or I'm sorry. Just business, just the job. It felt clean, like a boundary had been respected, like there was finally something solid between us, a space where we both knew the rules. I closed the laptop, pushed away from the desk. The design wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was right. It would hold. And for now, that was enough. I teach now. It's not something I ever planned on, but it's what I do. Same blunt tone, same worn checklist. I walk new engineers through the unfallable bridge case. No names, just the facts. A flawed module, a skipped gate, a quiet fix. I don't sugarcoat it. I don't give them the glossy version. I show them what happens when things are rushed, when shortcuts are taken. I show them how easy it is to hide failure behind a pretty face, how one ignored detail can bring down everything. One of the younger officers raises his hand. Isn't it hard? He asks. Turning someone in? I don't look away from the board. Not when it saves lives. He nods slowly, like he's thinking it through. It's a good question. The kind of question you don't really have an answer for until it's too late. Another officer, a woman this time, leans forward. What does save systems? I don't hesitate. I grab the marker and scrawl it on the board. Checklists, process, people who don't blink. It's simple, but it's everything. The basics, the things you can't afford to skip, the rules that matter when you're dealing with people's lives. They have to understand that. It's not just about the math, the engineering, or the design. It's about discipline. It's about making sure no one gets lazy, not for a second. I erase the board when I'm done, but there's one red mark I leave behind, right where Phase 4 disappeared in the old design. The one they skipped. The one that would have saved lives if someone had caught it. At the end, a young engineer asks me, almost cautiously, do you ever talk to the man behind the design? The one who created the original system? I glance up at him, then back at the board. Not often, I say. But his next design passed. That's what matters. There's no sentimental closure here, no reunion, no grand conversation about forgiveness. It's not about that. Not anymore. I grab my bag and head out of the classroom. Outside, the wind stirs leaves near the loading dock, and I can hear the steady rhythm of shoes on pavement. No applause, no thanks, just the sound of work being done. I keep the lesson alive, every day, not for revenge, not to settle old scores, but for the ones who'll never know how close the failure came.